Right. Hopefully you all have the first slide up on your screens. Okay, Pride of Africa. Pride of Africa have their headquarters in Maun in Botswana, and they have a satellite office in South Africa and another one in Namibia. But today we're going to focus on boats, river safaris in the Okavango Delta. Just before we get into the boats, I just want to give you a little bit of background on Pride of Africa Safaris themselves. This is a family-run business. They've been around for 14 years. As I said, the headquarters are based in Maun. They're a full inbound tour operator. Mobile safaris are their speciality. That image that you can see in front of you is their standard camp setup. The inside of the standard tents look like this. Nice big spacious tent, which was designed specifically so that it would have wheelchair access, which is useful. You've got a lovely comfortable metal framed bed, proper mattress. You've got hanging storage. You can see outside the tent there is a folding safari basin that I'm sure most of you have used in the past. There's solar lighting inside the tents, and they're all en suite with a shower and a chemical toilet. Pride of Africa have quite a large fleet of vehicles in Maun. They use only their own vehicles and they use only their own camping equipment so that they can maintain a very high standard of quality. You can see on the left-hand side there the game viewers. That central vehicle is what they use for meet and greets and pickups in Maun and transfers around town. And then the two trucks are support vehicles for the mobile safaris when they go out. This is the family. Obviously, the staff are really the people that make all of this work. Every trip that goes out on the road is supported, obviously, by the guides. You've got camp hands, you've got a chef, you've got waiters. On the right-hand side, the two ladies are part of the Maun admin team. There's a small reservations office in Maun. I also want to introduce you this morning, I think they're both listening actually, to the guys at About Africa, who you may be familiar with. They are the UK-based reservations office for Southern Cross. And recently, Hazel Edgington has joined them from Pride of Africa. So she's now the travel trade consultant based in the UK. And I'll give you Hazel's contact details at the end of this. She's second from the right there. I'm sure Sherry and Anne in that picture might be familiar to some of you. Pride of Africa safaris operate throughout Botswana. So alongside the boat trips in the Okavango Delta, they are functioning in the Kalahari, Chobe, Savuti, the Moremi areas, using a mixture of lodges, using the Hatab campsites, and as we'll see on our next slide, using the private island campsites that the boat safaris operate off. So this is a satellite image of the Okavango Delta. It doesn't have, it's not very clear on here where the main river channel is, so I'm going to try with the wonder of technology to add my idea of where the main channel is. Coming up out of Maun, past Chief's Island, heading up into the Panhandle, up towards Sepupa, and then up to the border with Namibia. So just take that yellow line as the main channel that the boats use as their highway into the Okavango Delta. I'm sure a lot of you have been there. The Okavango Delta is a remarkable habitat. There's 17,000 square kilometers of wetland. Obviously, it shrinks and expands through the seasons. There are 50,000 islands to explore in the Okavango Delta. Typically, these boat safaris start and finish in Maun. That's the most cost-effective way of doing this. Your clients would arrive in Maun and they will be met by the Pride of Africa guide, and instead of hopping onto a small aircraft and flying into the Okavango Delta, which is very common, they'll be driven down to the riverbank and they'll climb into a boat and they'll start their adventure that way. Just to give you an idea of distances, the first campsite that we use from Maun is, I'll circle it on the map. It's about a 3-hour boat trip, 130 kilometers from Maun. It's inside the Moremi Reserve, so you're inside a national park. It's a protected habitat. But it's quite a bit of distance if you think about that in a boat. 130 kilometers between yourself and the nearest town. It's a wild environment. It's brilliant. The longest trips that Pride of Africa run go all the way up from Sapupa at the top of the map there down to Maun. That's a 7-day trip. It takes it's about 500 kilometers to cover. You can see with the number of camps that are dotted around this map that it's very easy to combine Pride of Africa's boat safaris with time spent in permanent camps. Right, this is a homemade map, very low tech. I just stuck some stickers onto a tourism board map. But these yellow dots mark the Guides Association campsites. When you're on a mobile safari on dry land in Botswana, you stay in Hatab campsites. When you are on the river, you stay in Guides Association websites, and only a couple of companies, two in fact, to my knowledge, have permits to access these, and one of those is Pride of Africa. Just like the Hatab sites, you do need to book and plan these safaris far in advance. Obviously, we're dealing with a very small number of potential campsites. There's nothing on these islands. They are literally a blank canvas upon which Pride of Africa build their safari camps. I just wanted to mention briefly as well, because it's a question that people ask a lot. Our safaris in the boats tend to start and finish in Maun. That's the easiest way to do things. It's the most cost-effective way to do things. If you wanted to start your safari in Maun, travel up the river, camp on the islands for a couple of nights, and then fly your clients on to another part of Botswana or the Delta, we can easily do that from a couple of airstrips. And on this map, you can see how close, in this instance, the Eagle Island Lodge airstrip is to the river. So you literally have your last night with Pride of Africa, have breakfast, climb into the boat, and you'll be transferred down the river onto the, in this case, Eagle Island Lodge, onto the airstrip and fly out. So it's very easy to combine with the rest of the Delta. Usually you'd be flying into Kakanaka or Kwai if you were going on to do a mobile safari. Otherwise, you'd be heading off to one of the private airstrips. Seasons are something you do have to think about when you're planning a river safari for obvious reasons. We get good floods and we get bad floods. This year, water levels are actually looking very good. I think we're going to have good deep water up through to November. But our peak season with the boats is May to October. That means that the boats can clear all the main sandbanks throughout the Delta, so we can run a trans-Okavango trip if we want to. If your clients are just interested in a 2 or a 3-night shorter trip, we're staying that much closer to Maun. We don't have to worry so much about the sandbanks. Obviously, the weather in May and October works very nicely for us as well. The game viewing is very good. We're not going to get wet. When the green season does come, our focus with the boats shifts up to the deeper water of the Panhandle, and our priorities turn to fishing and year-round excellent birding. But you have to bear in mind that when we are guesstimating water levels, we have to consider local rainfall in Botswana, but also the floodwaters coming down from Angola. I just wanted to show you, to give you an idea of the differences in habitat. The image on the screen in front of you now is classic Panhandle. You've got that papyrus fringed stream. It's a less diverse habitat. It's absolutely beautiful. I spent over a year on a houseboat up in this neck of the woods. It's a lovely place. It's a very unique habitat, but we tend to, here's another shot of a one-off kayak trip that Pride of Africa did also up in the Panhandle. You can see how papyrus will restrict the game viewing potential. So we tend to focus our boat safaris along the southern edge of Chiefs Island, a little bit closer down to Maun. You can see the habitat opens up. You've got floodplains, very little papyrus blocking your view. You've got lovely riverine trees, and the trees are essential because not only do they provide shade for wildlife, but they also provide good browsing for the elephants in particular. So they attract wildlife to the riverbanks, and this is our preferred setting for a boat safari. This is an aerial view of one of the campsites. You know, as I said, there's nothing there. This is it's a spot on a map that the guides know how to find. The landscape changes throughout the year. The floodwaters rise, and some of this land will be swamped, and then the floodwaters will recede, and we'll have more land to walk on. But really, we're talking about dots on a map. There's nothing there to spoil the landscape or have any kind of impact on the local wildlife. Pride of Africa really are all about providing front row seats to the Okavango Delta, but without leaving, hopefully, much more than footprints. You can see to the right of that little lagoon, that lovely dry area, and walking is very much a part of the boat safari experience. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. In a minute, I want to show you the boats. So, as you would in a safari camp, you get to know your vehicle very well. On a boat safari, you spend quite a bit of time on board these lovely flat-hulled aluminium boats. They've got long-range fuel tanks. There's a fridge on board so that you can carry fresh food and nice cold drinks. For safety, there's a radio and a satellite phone. There are recharge points, so you can keep your camera or your phone. If you're shooting movies on your iPhone, you can charge them up on board the boat. All the boats use 115 horsepower four-stroke engines, which, if you're familiar with outboards, possibly you may not be. They're very quiet. They don't tend to disturb the wildlife. They are also a little bit more ecologically sound than the old-fashioned two strokes, which spit out a lot of oil. And the guy at the back there is essential. He's the river guide, and that's what he is. It's his full-time job. He guides on the river. He's not a lodge or a mobile safari guide that we second to the boats. This is someone who loves and knows this environment inside out. This is actually, this was a fam trip that ran a couple of years ago, but you can see these boats can accommodate up to 12 in our largest boat. Then there's a 10-seater and there's an 8-seater. Obviously, we see a lot of couples and families traveling, and they'll be going out in an 8-seater. There's a support boat that goes on ahead of you, carrying all of the camp equipment, including the chef, which is essential. These boats work very well as camera platforms. They are very stable. It's a flat hull. Obviously, we're not dealing with waves in the Okavango Delta unless the hippo comes up next to the boat. There's no dust to deal with, which is another thing that photographers quickly come to love about shooting off the boats. And walking, obviously we don't spend all day every day on the boats. We are continually passing enticing islands. We go past lots of floodplains, and walking is very definitely part of the experience. You have to be mindful of the fact that these safaris are very often inside national parks and reserves. So the guides do have to work to various restrictions. One thing's for sure, you're never going to walk into another human being or a tourist on one of these safaris. If you do have clients that are exceptionally keen on walking, I would suggest don't make this the walking experience on their overall safari. Build in a private concession walking trail at some point. Obviously, Hazel and Anne at Pride of Africa will be very happy to discuss the potential for that with you separately. I wanted to show you what a lunch stop might look like. Often the guide will pull up to shore and just set up a chair and tables in the shade of a tree, but there's no reason why we can't enjoy lunch on some of these sandbanks. Anyone can set up a bush lunch, but why not create something a bit more memorable? These are all experiences that you're not going to experience unless you're on a boat safari. So I want to show you what the camps look like now. This tent is a family setup, so it's actually two tents zipped together with a shared bathroom there on the right-hand side. All of Pride of Africa's tents are en suite. So in this case, with the family tent, it's nice. It means the children can go to bed whilst the parents stay up by the fire and enjoy a couple of extra drinks. Everything is solar powered. Food is cooked over the fire, so there's no generator thumping away in the background. When you fall asleep on one of these islands, you fall asleep to the sound of frogs, and you wake up to the sound of bird song. There's nothing else to disturb you. There's no light pollution, so the stargazing is superb. This is inside the family tent. You can see on the left-hand side that closable partition to create a bit of privacy. As you saw in the earlier images, you've got a comfy metal frame bed, a decent mattress, bedside table, a little solar lamp. There's plenty of storage space for your luggage. This is the twin tent setup. You can see the extended arm on the top of the tent there for the bucket shower. Outside the tent, you've got your folding canvas basin. And inside, it's simple but effective. When you consider the location that these camps are in and the hours of cruising through the wilderness to reach them, they're actually amazingly comfortable. And the feedback is continually the clients are amazed at the standard of the camp when they do get there. They've been sitting in the boat for a few hours, they've seen some wonderful wildlife, and in the back of their minds, you know, they're thinking, well, where are we actually going to sleep tonight? And they arrive on the island, and they're always very relieved when they see how nice the camps are. And it amazes me how the staff can break these camps down and leave absolutely no trace on the island. The bathrooms look like this. Bucket showers, I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Typically, we'll use chemical toilets. They're easier to deal with than continually digging short drops all over the place. They're good, spacious-sized bucket showers as well. You can have a really good shower. And when you're eating on the island, there will be a small covered dining table set up. So you'll get up in the morning and have a nice leisurely breakfast. Lunch is usually taken as a picnic somewhere out in the field. Otherwise, you could come back to camp. It's really up to you. If this is a private safari, you're setting the agenda. And then in the evening, dinner is a lantern-lit affair with drinks around the campfire. All the boats, the support boat and the main guide's boat will have, as I said, a fridge on board, which is how the food is transported. These tents, the dome tents, are the equipment used on trans-Okavango trips simply because the guides have to be very careful with space management in the support boat. So if you are planning a trans-Okavango, you get a smaller dome tent with a nice comfy bedroll on the floor. You still get your solar light, you get your wash basins. The only real difference is that you have a shared shower and toilet facility. But they do the job just fine. And as ever, the staff make the trip. On a river safari, the staffing will include the guide, obviously a chef and a camp hand who will probably double up as a barman. That would be a minimum standard. I just want to look a little bit at the wildlife. Obviously, you know, we all have a very good idea of the amazing wildlife that you're going to see in Botswana. Everyone loves predators when they come to Africa. Now, you may well hear lions calling, particularly at night, or find evidence on one of your walks of hunting activity, especially during periods of low water. But on these river trips, the apex predator is the crocodile. You see all that big hairy stuff later on when you're back on dry land. I think the lack of leopard, lion, and cheetah on these trips by no means should detract from them. Really, this is about focusing on marine and aquatically adapted wildlife. The good thing about not worrying about big cats and hunting like you do in a lodge or a mobile safari is you don't have a crazy 4 o'clock wake up in the morning. You don't have to sit through any night drives. You'll get to experience that at some point on your safari, but the boat trips are a lot more easygoing. You don't want to be on the water until the sun is up. And this is the reason why, as soon as the sun's down, we leave it to the hippos. Hippos are immensely useful. They keep all the channels open, and a lot of the trails that the boats follow don't exist if the hippos are not active. You'll also see some fantastic, you get Cape clawless otters, monitor lizards swimming across the channels. One of the first big spots invariably on these trips are the elephants, obviously found throughout the Okavango Delta. I think it's worth making the point that water, from my point of view, it brings out the playful side in every species, not just humans. If you think back to your most animated elephant sightings, I bet that water was involved in most of them. It really brings the wildlife to life, and unlike a stationary elephant just kicking dust under a tree, which is a common sighting on safari, A river crossing is very exciting. It's one of Africa's most iconic wildlife experiences. Sightings of the more aquatically adapted antelope are understandably common. Red lechwe, if you're lucky, the Sitatunga. Again, these are sightings reserved only for those that travel by boat. It's very unlikely that you'd be lucky enough to see something like this whilst you're in a Land Rover traveling along the edge of a river. The boats are very effective at getting close to wildlife. As I say, the engine's very quiet. Waterbuck. If you think about how often on a game drive the wildlife you're following gives you the slip, as soon as you find some marshy ground or a bit of flowing water, you get left behind. On a boat safari, you're really gaining access to the private sanctuaries that the boats are quiet enough to slip into without disturbing the wildlife. You really do get to see the backstage access of the Okavango Delta. I have to mention birding because it's superb year-round. It doesn't matter what you're looking for, your chances are very high. If you give us, 2 nights, 3 days on a boat safari, you're going to see all the local specials, jacanas, the bee-eaters, storks, cranes, herons. If you're lucky, you might come back with a Pell's fishing owl sighting. Every single day, you will see the amazing African fish eagle. This guy's called a nice little tiger fish. They're often watching from a riverside perch as you drift down the river, and their call is definitely part of the river safari soundtrack. I just want to mention families a little bit because there are no age restrictions on these trips. You can enjoy your little wind in the willows moment. Children love messing around in boats. It gives them a chance to get a little bit hands-on. They can have a go at catching a fish. If they do catch a fish, they can have a go at cooking a fish. But children respond really well to the excitement of being in the boats. It's a bit of barefoot adventure. You're surrounded by the wild, but you're safe and you're comfortable. I think boat activities really make you feel like you're part of the adventure rather than just an observer. Sometimes sitting in the back of a Land Rover, you can feel a little bit like you're off where the guide wants to go, whether you want to go there or not. On the boat safaris, you're right in the front row. Life on the river is also a little bit less arduous. I'm thinking still about children here. Those long, dusty drives and hot walks on land that can wear them down may suit older children, but younger children soon get tired of that. On the boats, when the kids have had enough, it's easy to glide back to camp rather than bumping along some dusty trail. So let's have a look at pricing. A shorter trip, the 3-day Kingfisher Safari, and I'll share all of these rates on a rate sheet after I finish this talk. This is 1,260 US dollars. That's based on a group of 4, and that is 3 full days of exploring the Okavango. I personally, we do run one-night safaris, but I really don't think it's enough time to understand this habitat and to get far enough away from Maun, get into the Maremi and to make the most of it. So I would suggest a 2-night is a good starting point. If you push it up to 3 nights, we're up to 1,645. We're still, I'm trying to do the maths in my head, we're still under 500 US per person per night, which for peak season Botswana is a good rate. Those trans-Okavango trips that I mentioned, 7 days in the Okavango, that's 3,745. That is a huge experience at, I think, a very reasonable price for Botswana. As it says here, you can do these trips with a minimum of 2 guests, which is very useful. Pride of Africa also run a number of scheduled mobile departures throughout the year, and you can add onto those as a pre-safari experience one of these boat trips. Just to give you an idea of what the land-based trips cost for camping, is a sample 9-day trip, which is very popular. 4 days inside the Maremi Reserve, looking at 2 different areas, the east and the west. Couple of nights in that nice lion hotspot of the Savuti Channel, and then finishing up in the Chobe Chobe area with that very productive waterfront. 4,000 US for 9 days. These are rack rates, and there's a 20% commission included in that rate. Just out of interest, it might be worth mentioning that there is availability still on several of these departures running through peak season this year. Hazel has all the details on that, and I'll send you some information in a minute. Finally, some of the other things that Pride of Africa can help you with, they have a very well set up, accessible safaris option. That means clients in wheelchairs or with fairly complicated health problems, they have vehicles, boats, and tents capable of managing those travelers. Obviously, photographic safaris. If we have very keen photographers, we can rearrange the setup in the boats. We can move chairs, we can move the benches out of the way, and we can create a very good camera platform. Fishing safaris, again, the panhandle is where we head for those. Incentive groups, I'm not sure if anyone listening today is particularly big in incentive groups, but that's another speciality that separates Pride of Africa from some of their competitors in Maun. Right, now I'm going to click out of here and see if there are any questions that have been posted. Doesn't look like it, but everyone's still here, which is good. I'm going to show you a very short movie now, which will give you a good idea of what it actually looks like to be out on one of these. Let's just see if anybody's got any questions. Looking at the 3-day, 2-night, roughly what time are the clients? Okay, good question. Well, they would depart from Maun whenever they were available. So if they came up from Johannesburg, as most people do, they would be met off their flight, and as long as we have 2.5 to 3 hours of daylight, we can easily get out to that first campsite. And on their day of departure, again, we would tailor make it to their requirements. So when I did this trip, most recently, my flight out of Maun was actually 10 o'clock in the morning. So we got up and had an early breakfast and zoomed down the river, and I was easily back in time for my flight. Any other questions? Oh, okay. I'm just being corrected on some prices here. We'll send through all of the rates when this is finished. Life jackets are available. To be honest, not very many people choose to wear them. It's hot. It's very unlikely that someone would fall out of a boat unless they chose to do it or they had drunk very heavily. We're not dealing with waves or currents that kind of wrong foot the guide. It's nice, flat water, and generally that's not a problem. Safety is not something we worry too much about inside the boats. Right, let me show you this movie quickly.
I'll put them on the boat.